had my blood result and everything is within range. I said, okay, and how do you feel about that? And he was like, oh, it's good. It's in range. But if I said that about your company at the end of the year and I looked at your books and I looked at your team's performance and I said, it's good. It's within range. Would you be satisfied? And he kind of laughed it off and said, what are you talking about? No, I pursue excellence. They have to go above and beyond
Exactly.
and meets their target and excel. I was like, well, why don't you want that for your house too? Why are you settling for within range when you could be optimal, excellent, above average? If you wouldn't accept that level of mediocre to average to standard performance for your business, why on earth would you accept that fate for your own body?
Exactly. I like that. Yeah, 100%.
It got me quite excited. I'm very passionate about that topic, so I'm glad we aligned. Olivia, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here after meeting in person in Copenhagen. It's so
Yeah.
wonderful to have you on the show. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, good. Well, actually, I'm a little bit jet lagged. I only flew into Australia from the US this morning. So, but I feel good. I feel good. And actually, I'm making sure that I stay awake till about 9 o'clock, and then that'll reset my circadian rhythm.
And I think it's very impressive that you were able to show up for a podcast interview after flying in across the world. I think it shows a lot about the amazing tools that you have for your own well-being and how much you walk the talk. So I was wondering if we could start off by how did you develop your passion for health optimization, mental health? I know you do so much wonderful work. Tell us more about your intrinsic motivation to work in that field.
Um, hmm, I think that a lot of us doctors who work in these sorts of fields, we have our own kind of hero's journey, our own personal experiences. For me, it kind of started off with the fact that my mother passed away when I was 17 years old with breast cancer. And to see the way my father really endeavored to use all the tools in the toolbox, conventional as well as alternative, to try and get her better, it really opened my eyes to how much there is out there, how many people were willing to step up and to help him in trying to save her. It also showed me how the patient has to be willing to meet you halfway. My mom was a wonderful woman, but she didn't quite have the fight in her that my dad wished she had, for whatever reason. And that was an important lesson for me as well. And I had actually been quite an unwell child growing up. So I had severe asthma and hay fever, and I don't remember a day in my childhood without needing a Ventolin or being, not being able to participate in sports. My struggles with exercise actually stems from that time where I got exercise-induced asthma, and the doctor actually said to my mom, "Don't let her do sports because she's gonna wind up getting exercise-induced asthma and maybe dying." And that stuck in my head. Right. So of all the things, like, exercise is an Achilles heel for me. I really struggle with that. And
Because
as I
of
got
that
older,
deep-rooted fear, right?
right. And as I got older, there was sort of more and more diagnoses that I started to acquire: polycystic ovaries, anxiety, depression, IBS, constipation dominant. I just had so many different diagnoses. And when you live in a world where that's considered normal, you don't realize that life could be better because everyone tells you it's your genetics.
Yeah.
And this fatalism, this determinism, just kind of, you just float along the river of life, a victim to your genes. And it's a bizarre state of affairs because I came from a family which was quite, health conscious. But back then, the marketing was so strong. So it was about margarine and not butter. It was about vegetable oils, and it was about being low fat and, what have you. And when I think a lot of people think as well, when you're young, you can kind of get away with eating whatever you want. You burn it off anyway. And there was a lot more, I don't know. It's a very interesting state of affairs, because I look back now and I had quite a privileged upbringing, and I still fell down so much. And so I accidentally got better when I was in my mid 30s. And it's because I went through a period of time where I had routine. It was low stress. I was in a safety-filled, loving relationship. I changed my diet. I got on a couple of supplements, and and I also got Invisalign, which meant that I was constantly biting down on something, and then retrained myself as a nose breather. And just this little combination of things, that was it. That was a switch that changed everything. And of course, being curious, I then dive deep into how it is that quite simple, fundamental things was able to change my health and my health trajectory, because I have not needed any Ventolin since then. So that's almost 10 years now. And I have gone from strength to strength. And every time I do fall down, like we all do, like the best of us do, my curiosity picks me back up, and I'm able to sort of tease apart how it is that my health wasn't quite what it could be or should be. And that is my hero's journey. That is my origin story. That is why I do what I do, because I am actually the average person. There is nothing special about me, or maybe more appropriately, I am as special as everyone else. I just happen to have a medical degree. I happen to be incredibly curious. And so how I've teased apart everything has just breathed life into my medical practice, and allows me to connect with my patients in a way that they understand, because I am them.
And
That's my story.
on that note, you being them and them being you, and seeing that almost that mirror, right, in your patient, I would love to explore, what patterns do you see most often? What is your typical patient journey? What do people come to see you for?
Oh, okay. So I'm a fractional medical director, chief medical officer, or associate practitioner in lots of different companies and clinics. So it depends on the clinic. At the Brain Center in Sydney, I'm the medical director of functional and longevity medicine. And so there I see brain patients, whether it's neuropsych, neurodegenerative, oncology, post-surgical rehab. So those patients are all brain patients of some description. In my normal practice that people can find me through, Instagram or whatever, it'll be sort of the lost causes, or patients who have kind of seen everyone and they don't know quite what it is. And the only reason why I get good results with these patients is because I also look at the psychological, emotional, and behavioral aspects to medicine. Because there are far better doctors than me that do immunology, endocrinology, nervous system, neurology. But it is looking at the patient as a whole, not overcomplicating the issue, taking it right back to fundamentals. And before you know it, you realize, wow, how important it is, that mindset, psychology, emotions, actually how important that all is on physiology and the initiation and trajectory of diseases. So I see complex chronic conditions, mystery illnesses, emerging syndromes. And mystery illness, I tell everybody this, mystery illness really is, I kind of cheat, right? By the time patients come to me, they've had all the blood work done and more. They've done all the urine and all the stool testing. I know what it's not. And it usually it's usually because the different doctors who've looked at this patient have ignored the mindset, have ignored the upbringing, have ignored the environment, the emotions, the psychology. So those are the kind of patients that I see. I will take anyone on. I'm a very curious person. And essentially, I have kind of like a unofficial guarantee. Basically, if I can't figure out what's wrong with you within 3 consults, I don't want you to see me again for another maybe 12 months. And by then I would have upgraded my knowledge. Right? So those are the patients that I see.
Can you tell us more about how the mind, the brain, or the psychology can actually negatively impact our health trajectory?
I think that most of us know that stress is going to negatively impact us in some way, shape, or form. Most of us have had an experience of our nervous system being affected. And then we all have an anecdote from our own lives, or from our friends or family's lives, where stress has impacted the immune system.
Yes.
So that in and of itself is all you need to know. Okay. Everyone talks about stress like it's this nobody really pins down what stress is. Stress is a negative state of mind. Stress is a negative state of emotions and feelings. It is the inability to reframe problems to gain perspective. It is also an issue with how you perceive threats. Because one person's threat is another person's challenge. And that in and of itself is a reframe, right? And we all know people who are less resilient. And we all know people who are more resilient. And when you actually sit back and think about it, the reason why I like people, or I myself like contemplating stress and what that really means to my mind and my heart and my body, is because it's something that's innate to me. I have control over that. It's got nothing to do with the doctor and his prescription pad. It has nothing to do with the psychiatrist and her fandangled new techniques to try and, zap my mind into a different trajectory. We have control. By and large, we have control over how we think about things. And many of us come from histories of some sort of trauma or neglect, or, a period of time where we didn't cope as well as we could have or should have. And then there are 2 ways that people deal with that. 1, they fall victim to it, or 2, they become a master of it. And I really don't think that any of us, well, I'm sure there are some gurus out there, but I think most of us spend our entire life learning the lessons that the universe is throwing us. And so if we can see that stress can cause dis-ease or illness, what does the medical literature say about that? And before you know it, you realize that in people who have got lower socioeconomic help or social help, or people who are highly stressed, they get negative outcomes with the cardiovascular system, in pregnancy, in mental health, of course, with their periods, with whether or not their cervical dysplasias become a cancer later on.
Yes.
All this is demonstrated in the literature. So we need to take a little bit more care, I think, with our patients and realize that distress is actually the 6th vital sign. It's something we should be talking to all our patients about and helping them achieve those little goals of self-resilience and help them figure out some tools that they can rely on. And, at the end of the day, I'm medically trained. I'm not psychologically trained, right? I've had to discover a lot of these things for myself, and I'm still learning. Like, I am in no way, shape, or form at the top of any mountain, right? But I think that in part is why what I say or how I say things resonates with patients, because they can see that this is a learning journey. No one thing is going to work for everybody.
You said the 6. Now I'm curious. What are the other 5?
So your heart rate, your blood pressure, your oxygenation and your ability to move, for example, and gosh, what else? But it's the things in hospital that we would absolutely be like coming in. How many of us talk about heart rate variability now? Right. We all know heart rate variability, right? We're even talking about other variabilities. We're talking about gait variability. We're talking about breathing variability. And all these give us an understanding or an insight into the stress resilience of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But nobody's actually talking about actual stress. Nobody's actually talking about joy. So even if we don't want to talk about like the negative stuff, which is fine, what in a patient's life are going to be their protective factors that we talk about in psychiatry?
Mm.
Do they have a roof over their head? Are they able to afford food? Do they have someone that they can tell their negative thoughts to?
Mm.
Do they feel safe? So looking at patients and just talking to them about the negative stuff that's going on in their life, sometimes it's triggering. But there are other ways to talk about what makes up a whole person, right?
Okay.
That includes all the good things in their life too.
I want to dive a little deeper in that notion of stress and chronic stress and think about an archetype of a patient that is under a lot of work pressure and perhaps somebody with, quite a lot of resources, financially very stable, professionally thriving, has a family, but is subject to that constant nonstop pressure, lots of international flights, constantly jet lagged, working on multiple time zones. I'm sure you have many of these patients. What can you tell us about the impact of that cumulative stress on your mental well-being, but also on physical manifestation, really? And how can that even lead to burnout? And how can we know that we may be heading that way? What are common signs and symptoms? I would love for your input on that.
So the archetype. So the interesting thing is that because we'll call it stress, psychological, emotional, and physical stress, because the stress hormone is adrenaline and cortisol, these don't change and haven't really changed for hundreds of thousands of years. In other words, your system doesn't know the difference between you being under threat because you're about to miss your flight, or because you've had one too many coffees, or you being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, or you are in the middle of a famine. It's the same stress hormones. What keeps us, flipping into a complete survival threat being, state of being, is that our cortex, our higher brains are able to talk our system through the fact that we are not being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. You can do this only so long before the body starts to, not that it doesn't believe you, but that it doesn't believe you. And it's going to start implementing some protective mechanisms just in case, because the number one thing that our bodies try to do is to improve survival odds. It's to keep you safe. So, for example, you like you said, you're the type A personality, CEO, bam, 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 bam. Your body is going to perceive that this adrenaline and cortisol means that there might be some threat to existence, some threat to survival. So it is going to implement some survival programs. And usually those survival programs have got something to do with the guardian sites of the body. A guardian site of the body is where if a parasite, bacteria, virus is going to attack you. And that, from an evolutionary perspective, was the number one reason why we used to have survival threats, right? It was invasion by these sorts of things. If one of those pathogens were to attack you or get in your system, and then you'd have to have a fight on your hands, it would usually come through what? Eyes, nose, respiratory tract, mouth, gastrointestinal tract, vagina, to a lesser extent, your urethra, and then your bladder. And of course, your skin, especially if the skin is broken. Now, of the skin, the parts which are most in contact with things in the environment, your hands and your feet and your face, are the most susceptible as well. So how does the system turn on a survival program? Well, it is going to increase gastric acid in your stomach, because just in case something is going to hitch a ride on the food that you're eating, which is normally how these things get in anyways, usually through something you breathe in or something you eat. Just in case something is going to hitch a ride through the food that you're eating, it's going to increase gastric acid, because that is how it's the first protocol. It's going to burn up whatever it is. It's going to kill it with pH, low pH, with acidity. That's also called reflux. How many high performers have reflux issues?
So many. I see
So
this
many.
every day. Mm-hmm.
Right. And they blame food, which in part is true. But what is this is chicken and the egg thing. What in the beginning started this now probably vicious cycle where they have reflux, and so they pop, like a PPI or some sort of antacid or some description. They artificially lower their gastric acid, their production of gastric acid. The system goes, oh my gosh, I don't have my sentries at the gate. Okay, I'm just going to increase gastric acid because I'm trying to protect you. And so then you go into this terrible cycle of needing constant antacid treatment. Mm-hmm. And then certain foods are going to cause issues, right? And it's always the foods with like chili or capsaicin. Why? Because these things bind on to a threat receptor called transient receptor potential V1. And these threat receptors are evolutionarily conserved all the way down to the nematode worm up to us. They are threat receptors because they take in all sorts of things: pH, osmolarity, chemosensation, pressures, and also chemicals from foods or chemicals from the environment. So then you eat something spicy, the TRPV1 is triggered. TRPV1 says, oh my God, there's a threat. And then before you know it, it continues this vicious cycle. So that's just one. I'll give you another example. People who are constantly stressed and there's this like threat issue, they get more watery eyes or itchy eyes, or they get more mucus in their nose. They get allergies, more likely to get allergies, because the whole point of your eyes increasing tears or mucus from your nose is to wrap itself whatever offending organism might be trying to get a foothold in your system. Then you can rub it out, tear it out, mucus it out, sneeze it out, cough it out. It's all your immune system trying to help you, trying to save you, right? I don't know why you have so much adrenaline and noradrenaline and cortisol, right? However, I'm going to do my best to make sure that if the threat that you seem to be facing is a pathogen trying to get in, I'm going to do my damn best to make sure that whatever it is doesn't get in.
And would that also be the reason why really high performing, high stress type A professional are also subject to more asthma attack when they're under a lot of stress at work? Because I'm thinking about my clients here and the number of clients that I have that say, I had a really bad day and my asthma is really bad.
Right. So then we think, what is asthma, right? It is the constriction of the bronchioles. And the whole point of that is in case Now, there are many reasons, like, let me just be very clear, right? But if we're talking about a psychoneuroimmunology perspective, in case the threat that you seem to be facing because of all this cortisol and adrenaline in your system is something trying to get in through your nose and your respiratory tract, I'm going to make sure that whatever it is doesn't go deep into the lungs. I'm going to constrict the bronchioles, because the deeper whatever it is, let's call it a virus, the deeper the virus goes into the lung tree, the harder it is to get out. I would rather stop it in its tracks a little bit further up, and then you can sneeze it out or cough it out. It's all self-protection.
Would that also explain the reason why really stressed out patients go into hives or rashes, eczema? Because that's also extremely common. Well, I've had,
Yes.
especially, male or female saying even during the summer, they had to wear really long sleeves, even when they were really hot and sweaty, because they had bad eczema.
There are lots of different reasons for eczema, so I just want to be very clear. However, from a P&I perspective, if we're looking simply at threat perception, threat responses, then inflammation is a really good way for your body to turn on the immune system, to start surveilling for threats, and also increasing sensitivity. So, if you get like a gum infection and you've got this inflammation, it's very sore, it's very tender. You can't drink cold water on that. Inflammation increases sensitivity. So when you get stressed and you have a propensity, your skin is your weak spot, right? We all have like weak spots. My weak spot is my lungs, because I grew up with very severe asthma, for example. But some people have got like a susceptibility to having those hives or the eczema. The body is going to increase inflammation in the skin for a couple of reasons. One, when there's more inflammation in the skin, you're more likely to pick up threats faster and earlier. It's a way to decrease surprise and increase reactivity. Two, the skin and the nervous system share an embryonic history. When the sperm fertilizes the egg, you get it going 2, 4, 8, 16, and you can't keep going like that. You just be a big ball, right? So at some point, it differentiates itself into 3 germ layers. You've got your ectoderm, your mesoderm, and your endoderm. The ectoderm is the root, is the primary mama of your brain, your nervous system, nerves, and your skin. They talk to each other. So when your nervous system, when your brain is really struggling, for those people where their skin is their susceptible organ system, the skin expresses big style.
That is really fascinating to understand the connection. And you mentioned P&I, and I just want to make sure for our listener that may not be familiar with the terminology, can you just explain it in a very sort of layman perspective? Let's pretend I'm a 10-year-old girl who's never heard that term. Can you explain it to me?
Yeah, so P&I is psychoneuroimmunology. It is that intersection point between psychology, behavioral sciences, emotions, for some of us also spirituality, the nervous system, immunology, and endocrinology. Essentially, it is what a doctor should be doing by looking at a patient as a whole and not just as its organ systems.
And if I understand correctly, Olivia, that could really be the reason why a lot of those mystery recurring conditions are not that mysterious after all.
They're not.
They're not, right? So I'm thinking about here, I'm just going to throw a common example. CEO or C-suite executive or lawyer or investment banker with constant chronic UTIs, for example. That's very, very common. And the more stressed the person is, the more UTIs. And we get into this vicious circle, and the person is drinking loads of water, staying hydrated. But here we go again. Board meeting the following day, UTIs the night before. I'm sure you come across that quite a lot.
Yes. So first of all, we have to unpack what a UTI is, because up until very recently, we talk about UTIs, urinary tract infection. But in the last few years, we have seen more and more that there aren't actually any bugs in the urine. So it's a urinary tract inflammation. We are seeing so many women coming through now with cystitis, inflammation of the bladder. So everyone talks about the fact that, oh, it's likely that certain bugs have gotten up the urethra. You need to pee before sex, pee after sex. You have to drink more water. You got to go and urinate as often as possible. You have to, all these reasons that we're giving, mostly to do with hygiene, right? But I can guarantee you that hygiene hasn't taken a nosedive for some reason in the last like 6 to 10 years, because we have been absolutely seeing a rise of cystitis. The problem as well is that in primary care, if you did have a urinary tract infection at some point, and then you were given an antibiotic for it, let's just say trimethoprim, the next time you come in and it looks like a UTI, smells like a UTI, feels like a UTI, bleeds like a UTI, you're going to get trimethoprim again. Sometimes they don't even check the urine again, right, to see what bug is responsible for this infection. But when you do check it and it isn't a bug, doctors are then stumped. Well, what do we do? It's just an inflammation. We're not quite sure. So we've actually been going down this road where, okay, inflammation is largely due in part by the degranulation of a type of white blood cell called a mast cell in the bladder. So you got extra histamine in there, which is why sometimes for cystitis, you can actually have some relief with antihistamines. But again, that doesn't tell us the why, right? So there is a very interesting possible connection. I have to say that this is something that is not largely discussed, understood, or accepted by the medical fraternity, conventional medical fraternity at large. However, I definitely do see this with my patients because I'm asking the questions and I'm looking for it, right? And that is this. When an animal marks their territory, let's just say you have a dog, you take them for a walk, they're able to cock their leg and make a little pee, just a tiny bit, just a little sprinkle, right? And they can do this several times on the walk. Now, when you see an animal pee, like properly pee, they pee like us, right? They squat or they cock their leg and the entire stream comes out. But for some reason on this walk, they have an instinctive ability just to piddle a little bit. So what's happening here? It's an ancient program. Animals mark their territories for one of two reasons. One, show of dominance. Two, out of fear, right? And they actually degranulate mast cells in their bladder to cause a slight irritation so that the irritation in the bladder lining causes a little bit of the urine to come out. We actually, anecdotally, I'll add that, anecdotally, I've seen that in patients, especially women, who have a trigger, something to do with territory or like a fight for dominance or a need to prove themselves or something like that, it's reflected in this ancient program being run. And they will have the same irritation in the bladder almost to help them mark their territory if they needed to. Now, this is, again, I'm going to say this, right? This is not something that is largely accepted or even discussed. But I heard about it in something called German New Medicine. And whilst I don't entirely understand the whole of German New Medicine teachings, this is something that captured my interest. And I would start to ask patients what's happened, with someone with lots of urinary tract infections, what's happened, or inflammations, what's happened in the last X number of months since this happened. And there will always be some sort of story
or threat of kind,
some sort of territorial threat. If the territory is actual territory like your home or the retaining wall between you and your neighbor, or if you
politics in the office.
politics in the office, or, you know, your husband's cheating on you or something like that, something which you believe to be your space, but you're not sure anymore, you're afraid. I've definitely seen that for sure.
You know, I'm really fascinated by this conversation because what I see with my female clients who are undergoing UTIs, their mindset is always, oh, yes, but in the past 6 months, I discovered that my husband had a lover, had an affair. So, of course, now I have UTIs, almost as if it was kind of a sort of a STD link, which we know it's not, but it's more the psychology of your territory being jeopardized, aka your marriage. And then,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
do you see a connection
Yeah.
there?
Because it's a threat, right? Like you, yeah. And your body is going to run ancient programs. And if you see things from an evolutionary perspective, what is your ancient program trying to do? It's trying to help you, right? Now there are definitely going to be doctors listening to this probably who are like, oh, this is rubbish, you know, it's all, and
We're
like,
just talking about
what,
anecdotes here and
right,
patient
they talk
stories,
about
right?
anecdotes, exactly. And the thing is, you know, there are, like I said, there are lots of reasons why people get their illnesses, absolutely. But this is a fascinating aspect that I have seen, and I'm not the only doctor that has seen this.
The more I think about it, Olivia, I'm just like in my head right now, I have all my clients with UTIs. I have divorces, affairs, fight for promotion, burnout, crisis with daughters or sons. I'm just thinking about all the different aspects, and I'm
And
just
so then the
like,
question is, how is it that you have a UTI, but it's for different threats, right?
right.
And that's because the mind sees things from a narrative perspective. So, for example, there will be some people who see their partner, their husband, let's just say, you know, it's how we see a partner can be in different ways, right? It can be a lover, they can almost be a father figure, or they can be like a son figure, or they're like your best friend, or they can be your mortal enemy, or they're your business partner, or they're a pain, they're a threat, they're your source of joy, they're your connection to God, they are, you know, whatever. And so the narrative that your subconscious has about the different things in your life tends to be what determines how your body reacts to that. Which is why you rattle off quite a few things, which I've also seen in my patients. Some people see a divorce from a partner not as a threat to territory, right? They see it as good riddance to the anchor that was around my neck. I guarantee you those are not the patients that have a UTI. Right.
Yeah.
So I would just want to highlight that.
I did not have an UTI during my divorce because that I knew was the path to happiness in a way. And I know that's a controversial thing to say because divorce are always extremely challenging to navigate. But I knew that that particular relationship was not serving me and that I would, you know, be a lot more fulfilled in another marriage in the future, which is where I'm at now. And I did not have a UTI during my divorce, but I did have many while I was in that marriage. So there you go. Full disclosure. And can we just also mention that I know we've dived into a topic that was unexpected, but I do get this confusion quite often from clients, and I think it's really important to highlight UTIs are not STDs. That's really key.
yes.
Right. But I think that there is still a bit of a reputation there and something there is often a question mark. So if, you know, if our listener could hear that from you, I think that would be really good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you know, if there is a bug introduced into the sexual organs, right? Yeah, for some people who are a little bit twitchy, their immune system and nervous system are twitchy, it will turn on inflammation in other areas.
Sure.
So, like the urinary tract. You know, another thing that I've seen in the last few years is a correlation. So, not causation, correlation between younger women, especially, but younger people getting a inflammatory bowel disease diagnosis not long after a sexual assault.
Hmm.
And, you know, stress, of course, is the word that everyone will use, and that is appropriate for sure. And it's just a miracle looking at how the body tries to protect you, right? Where you have something terrible happen in that area, and the entire area down there turns on inflammation as a way to try and protect you and to repair and to regenerate, because inflammation in the short term tends to be regenerative, and then in the long term it's obviously detrimental. But
And
anyway,
that's the difference between acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. In the same way, there is a difference between acute stress, which can be helpful, and chronic stress,
exactly.
which is
Right.
harmful, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. And interestingly enough, chronic stress doesn't necessarily have to be harmful, because having this constant stressor at your door is going to people are going to react to it differently. There are some people who they build resilience to it. It forces them to acquire new skills. It forces them to reframe. And there are some people who just crumble under the weight of chronic stress. And no one way is better or worse. It just is what it is. But I suppose for myself, trying to understand that, there's a lesson to be learned in everything. And not everyone is lucky enough to be able to escape their stressor, right? To escape their stress. And so whilst chronic stress is absolutely a real physiological problem for many people, leading to many of the chronic diseases that we see, we do still have some agency.
Olivia, I was really interested in how you mapped out those different parts of our bodies that, could get a sort of protective reaction. So we've talked about the eyes, the nose, we've mentioned the skin, we've talked about the gut, we've talked about the vagina. We haven't talked about a part that is a lot more inside than outside. And I'm curious as to the connection between that part of the body and that chronic stress from a PNI perspective, because it's not as exposed as skin and eyes and nose. And I'm thinking about our heart here. That's very much deep inside our body, right? Not exposed to the elements like the eyes, the nose, the skin. Yet we know there is a huge connection between stress and cardiovascular incidents. Can you tell us more?
Sure. So yes, the heart is not a guardian site because it's not exposed to exactly what you said. Okay, so cardiovascular incidents, what exactly does that mean? It is usually a function of inflammation. And inflammation, is increased by stress. So that's when we're looking at it from a PNI perspective. It can also be raised with a poor diet, and you know that. So, oxidized oils or excess sugar in the diet. That's why a lot of patients wind up doing very well, for example, on like a low carb diet. And then, of course, there's the insulin resistance. So cortisol affects insulin resistance. And when you have so much stress and the cells are constantly being flooded by sugar. Why are they being flooded by sugar? Because sugar into the muscle cells is going to be able to give them the energy that they need if they need to run or if they need to fight. And at some point, the cells are going to stop listening to the insulin, right? And then the sugar's not going to get into the cells as well as they could or should. And then before you know it, you're on your way to type 2 diabetes. Oh dear, you have type 2 diabetes. Oh no, there's inflammation everywhere. And it's the vessels around the heart in particular, which are going to have some serious issues. Now, the heart isn't the only one. It's the brain as well. These are two organs that do a lot of work. They do a lot of work. They take up a lot of energy. And anytime a cell uses a lot of energy, it also produces a lot of like metabolites, like fuel waste. And that's where the antioxidant system comes into play. So creating toxic metabolites, creating the fumes from metabolism, it's not a bad thing in and of itself. It tells you that your cells are working. Fantastic. It's when you do not have the capacity to deal with the fumes that is where you're going to start having your problems. So like I said before, the antioxidant capacity. Now, there are a few heart-specific-ish antioxidants that seem to be low in our diet. Ubiquinol being one of them, coenzyme Q10. I'm sure a lot of your C-suite executives are on that, right? But why are they on that? It's because it's so necessary for the function of the mitochondria, which produces energy, which is something that your heart cells need a lot of, right? They need a lot of mitochondria because they need a lot of energy. And so they need a lot of ubiquinol. And that's why they're supplementing CoQ10. And on top of that, C-suites tend to have not amazing lifestyles or diets, which means that a lot of them have got high cholesterol. Now, this is where I diverge, right? So they will have high cholesterol, and then my conventional colleagues will give them a statin, which just further chokes the mitochondria, which is why they absolutely need to be on a CoQ10. Actually, they need to be on a lot of stuff. But anyway, they're on a CoQ10. So I don't prescribe statins. Well, I don't prescribe statins full stop, but I don't prescribe statins off cholesterol anymore because that is quite a outdated model. There are a lot more biomarkers that we're using for heart health now, and that is where the savvy professional who is taking their health into their own hands needs to be asking some clever questions of a doctor who may not yet be up to speed with this. I recommend that people look at the work of Dr. Asim Malhotra, the cardiologist from the UK. He's done a lot of work on statins and about how, generally speaking, they are overprescribed. Absolutely. Even someone like Peter Attia, right, who, he talks a lot about cholesterol. We're not looking just at cholesterol to prescribe a statin. That is way oversimplified. And this is not preschool, right? We're looking at ApoB, Lp(a), subfractionation of cholesterol. What is the size of your LDL? What is the size of your HDL? And so on and so forth. There is so much more to it, such that if you are being prescribed anything off one biomarker, i.e. cholesterol, in this case, there is a big problem and you need to be asking more serious questions of your doctor. Anyway.
Oh, sorry.
Go on.
I'm really, no, I'm really glad you're bringing that up because I think commonly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel that we speak a lot about the brain-gut axis. And of course, that's a very, very important topic. And we know there is this crucial connection. But I don't hear as much being talked about between the brain and the heart connection and how, brain's health impact heart health and vice versa. So I think it's actually quite refreshing to tackle that connection.
Oh, yes. Because so the gut-brain connection, I mean, that took ages to get across the line. And now we know how important that connection is.
Yes.
But there is a gut eyes, gut skin, gut vagina, mouth skin, brain skin, brain, bladder connect. There are connections everywhere. The microbiome is talking to each other everywhere. And we're a little bit behind because I'm still surprised that everyone is, still worshipping at the altar of the gut brain, because I kind of feel like we know that. Does research have to continue? Of course it does, but the other connections are just as important. And what you're saying about the heart-brain connection, absolutely. We know heart-brain coherence is very important, right? So one of the things that we know with children, for example, who experience like an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, something that puts them into fight-flight, but because of their circumstance, and in this case, because they're children, they're not able to actually run or fight. They then go into a dorsal vagal response, which means that they fawn, flop, or freeze. So they play dead, or they dissociate, or they try to people please, because that is a survival instinct that comes out. right? And when that happens, your heart is still beating in the rhythm of the situation, but your mind goes somewhere else. Your mind does something different, and you come out of brain-heart coherence. So a lot of what we're trying to do, for example, the science director at sense.ai, so Sensei, SENS.ai, neurotechnology, what we're trying to do is use neurofeedback, EEG, and mind-heart coherence to help patients sort of rewire their brain in a way that's going to be most helpful to them. But this is what is the goal of meditation as well, mindfulness. It's about trying to get that mind and that heart in coherence. The other thing about the heart that's so important is that because of the way that the blood circulates and is pumped through it, it creates an electrical field called a toroidal field, Toroidal field. And this toroidal field can be picked up by electromagnetic sensors up to 6 feet away from the person. This is like your energy, essentially. And everyone talks about the heart being a pump. And in part, it is. But there is more to the blood system than just blood being pushed through the blood vessels by the heart. I won't really go into it, I suppose. It's not really that relevant. But the interesting thing about the way blood goes through blood vessels is that it's like a vortex. It actually kind of spins through the blood vessels. And when you have this kind of spin, there's actually a sucking action that starts to occur that pulls it, that's created, that pulls the blood. And it's not just the pump. That's why when when someone's heart stops, their blood doesn't stop pumping for a good few seconds to even up to a couple minutes. Blood still keeps going. Anyway, sorry.
No, I find it fascinating. Well, my father had a burnout-induced and chronic stress-induced heart attack on his way to work, and I was quite traumatized when I walked into the intensive care unit, and he had a stroke before my eyes a few days after the heart attack. So he had his heart attack on a Monday, and he had the stroke on Friday. So I'm very fascinated about the topic of heart attack. And in fact, that story is one of the reasons why I do what I do now.
I'm so sorry, Charlene.
Well, he survived.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah,
All right, this is
he
good.
did. He survived, and it's actually really been that life or death moment that made me realize that there was something quite unsustainable about the way I learned to operate from my father. You know, he's a wonderful man, extremely successful and driven, but I think his greatest weakness at the time was also his greatest strength, which was how conscientious and hardworking he was, and kind of got lost in the success equation a little bit when he didn't realize the price he was paying.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of the time it's a little bit too late, right? When we start to learn our lessons. And so that's really a really important thing for us to do. And it's to start learning lessons before before it punches us in the face.
Do you see that too, Olivia, in your patients, that we often wait for that punch in the face, that healthcare, that sort of car crash from a health standpoint before we take action? Do you still see that in your practice?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, not just with my patients, but with myself, right?
Yeah.
Pain is the greatest motivator. Challenge is the greatest motivator. And I tend to read all the self-help books and listen to all the self-help podcasts and sign up for courses and do far more meditation and breath work after a breakup. When I'm in the middle of a happy relationship, all of a sudden it'll be days, weeks since I last meditated, you know? So anyway, human nature, I suppose.
What is one thing that you would want to leave our listener with if they are perhaps not at the point where they've been hit so badly yet, right? So that they can see a decline, right? There is that lingering fatigue, or there are signs and symptoms. Let's say we're like kind of hearing the alarm bells ringing, but perhaps we haven't gone to the catastrophic health crisis yet. What would you say to them so that they don't wait for that car crash to happen?
Look, most of your clients, I imagine, are the go-getters, the C-suiters, the high achievers, right? And they understand the value of A/B testing, of assessing, pivoting before it's too late, jumping before you get pushed. They need to just take those concepts that they know very well and apply it to themselves. A little bit like how, we get our car checked up every year, even if there isn't any issue, no lights blinking.
Your
or whatever it is.
MOT, right?
Right, your MOT. And I mean, executive health screens, I think, are more common, but I have issue with them because I think that they're too, well, I mean, I'm a left of field doctor, so I'm not a massive fan of I'm not a massive fan of centralized medicine, right? Because what centralized medicine tends to be about is looking for a problem and, generally speaking, giving a drug for that problem. So I'm not a fan. There needs to be sort of more emphasis on prevention, of course, but people only learn to prevent things if they're educated.
Yeah.
So you need to understand some of these issues that are happening. Even the smallest symptom I want to know about because I'm able to extrapolate greatly from it. Like, I want to know about your itchy eyes.
Yeah. Well, I want
I
to
wanna
tell you
know.
now about my UTIs.
I want to know about the food that sometimes you can eat and sometimes you can't eat. So it's not an allergy, but sometimes I eat this food and I don't feel well. Like, that is significant. I want to know about your white hair. I want to know about its progression and how quickly it happened. Like, all these things are very significant for me because they tell me about an underlying process, tells me about biochemistry. And I personally don't think that very many executive health screening do a good job of that. They use far too big reference ranges because they're reference ranges that have been sort of trained on sick people, not on optimized people, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so my message would be, take your knowledge about how to run an amazing business and turn that spotlight on yourself. Educate yourself about your body and about looking for answers in places that you didn't think you would find answers.
I'm so glad you've said that because just last week, one of my C-suites said, oh, yes, I had my blood result and everything is within range. I said, okay, and how do you feel about that? And he was like, oh, it's good. It's in range. It's like, but if I said that about your company at the end of the year and I looked at your books and I looked at your team's performance and I said, it's good. It's within range. Would you be satisfied? And he kind of laughed it off and said, what are you talking about? No, I pursue excellence. They have to go above and beyond and meet their target and excel. I was like, well, why don't you want that for your house too? Why are you settling for within range when you could be optimal, excellent, above average? I was like, oh, yeah. And there I got the interest point, right? Like, if you wouldn't accept that level of mediocre to average to standard performance for your business, why on earth would you accept that fate for your own body?
Right. Exactly. I like that. Yeah, 100%.
It got me quite excited. I'm very passionate about that topic, so I'm glad we align.
So
Olivia, where is the best place for our listener to get into your world?
So all my social media handles, including LinkedIn and including my website, are Dr. Olivia Lesslar. So Dr. Olivia Lesslar. And that's it. I don't have a book or a course or anything like that at this point in time. I'm just focusing on trying to stay curious, learn more, and make sure I am getting to a point where I can really be of service to my patients. It's not been long since I stepped out of conventional medicine. It's only been maybe about 7 years or so. 8 years. And I've been looking under the hood of biohacking, longevity, functional medicine, integrative medicine, consciousness, and so on and so forth. And I'm still learning, still learning, still learning. So, yeah, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak to you and to speak to some of, whoever's listening in. But the most important thing is, from my perspective anyway, you always have some control. You always have some choice. Use it.
Thank you. We really needed to hear that today. I'm so grateful, Olivia, and I can't wait for us to collaborate again on a different topic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening in. I have a quick question for you now. What do you want to hear from me for our new latest episodes? Just give me a quick comment and let me know what you would like to hear about. Which topic are you passionate about? Which topic do you feel we haven't covered yet and you really want us to cover? Please let me know. This show is for you. And I want to know what you want to listen to. I can't wait to hear your feedback. Thank you.